packet going in with it. And I know I've already said this, but just to make sure we're perfectly clear with everything, it's not Scantron, so it's like a short answer. It could be a fill in the blank. There still could be some like multiple choice questions that would happen, but that's not what it's predominantly going to be. Just because something shows up tomorrow doesn't mean you can't have similar questions like logical fallacies, eloquence, Pullman model stuff showing up on Friday as well. It'll be, in some cases, definitions. It could be you applying things like, okay, here's a quote, a line, a passage. What's the logical fallacy? Why? What's the type of eloquence that is being used? Kind of explain it in that regards. So it's more of a application of the stuff that we've been going over, as opposed to you just simply, I got to memorize, definitions, match them, and all that kind of stuff. Like, Jeff? So like, is it going to be like name Aristotle's? This is a terrible answer. It could be, So this is not your midterm, what you just had. Now, there certainly could be questions. So you mentioning like, the Aristotle's rhetorical appeals. You could have something like this where you have to list the five and define them, but you also might have something where, okay, here's a statement. Mr. Kane, you should give me full credit on my midterm exam because I didn't get a chance to really sleep last night. We had some stuff going on, and I really, 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 really would appreciate it if you would let me just, not really worry about this assignment. Please. What type of rhetorical appeal is an example here, and the hope would be that you would know well, that's pathos, that's an emotional appeal type thing. So, without telling you what the questions are, you could have something like that, but at the very least, you would be taking the stuff that we go over with the review, and then like applying it to, examples and whatnot.
So is it, are we going to have a section on it?
Like when we did the speech? Yeah, something like that could certainly be.
Okay.
And just so that you're clear, you're not getting like the whole exam tomorrow, and here you work on it for one day, then you work on the other part. You'll get part one tomorrow. You do all of part one tomorrow, turn that one in, and then on Friday you get a separate part which we'll go through. So, not that Megan would be looking at questions and then skipping them, and then, I'll come back to Friday now that I know what they are, but you're not going to get those same questions on. But you can. I eat the skin off my grapes before I eat the grape.
That's exactly what I do, Mr. King.
Me and Mike are like,
It's like kind of gross when you're eating the sweet part, but then you're having That's like how you can eat.
Mike, since you mentioned the rhetorical appeals, why don't you give me one of them? Okay. All right, and so logos is appeal to logic. What's another one?
Ethos.
Which is?
Credibility of author.
Okay, so credibility of author or speaker. If you had something like this tomorrow where you had to identify and define, or given, here are the five, define what they are or whatnot, the one that I would expect people to make a mistake on most commonly would be ethos, because, you go logos, logic, ethos, that begins with an E, therefore that must be emotion. But remember, that's going to be pathos. So a lot of times people go ethos is emotional, I think just because you're thinking of the letter repeating itself. But ethos, you're looking at credibility or like an ethical appeal. Pathos would be the one where you have the emotional appeal taking place.
Yeah, you know how to like the psychopath.
I remember because the first two letters are P.
Whatever helps you remember. These three, I would say, we're pretty good with because you've consistently heard them before, like in other courses and whatnot. The last two are the ones where we kind of get a little shaky.
Keros.
So we have Keros, and we have Telos. Kobe, what do you have for Keros?
I just said the setting.
Okay, so this is like the setting, the situation that would be taking place. Again, for our purposes, there's not a whole lot you can do with the Kairos, but May made reference to Martin Luther King because we took a look at his speech, I Have a Dream. Remember, he gives that speech in D.C., in the mall, in front of, not the shopping mall, but in front of the Lincoln Memorial, and then he starts off with that allusion to Abraham Lincoln 50 ago. So the setting works out pretty well for what his content of it was going to be. Telos, this is where we're looking at the overall purpose. So this could be purpose and like attitude. What is it that you are trying to accomplish? All right? Any questions with those? Oops. Josh Selzer, what do you got for like a reason for argument for Aristotle?
Means of defense.
All right, so one of them, means of defense. Jess, what's another?
See both sides.
See both sides.
Prevent fraud.
Hold on. What are we seeing both sides of?
The argument.
An argument. Megan, you said
Prevent fraud and injustice.
prevent fraud.
This test is all short answer, correct? It's all
And fill in
open-ended.
the blank and.
All, yeah.
All open-ended.
Corey, how about our last one?
Opportunity to instruct and educate public.
Okay, so instruction for public. You might recall when we were going over all of these things, since you're taking a look at a means of defense, instruction for public, you're seeing both sides, preventing fraud and injustice. The best place to see this in current everyday world would be within the courtroom. That would be
So like, what's the format of this test?
Paper.
paper and pencil.
That was an illusion.
Short answer, fill in the blank, prove knowledge. It's written, but you're not doing an essay.
So, is there any multiple choice?
There could be, but it's not Scantron.
Could there be a word name?
No.
No.
Jared, Toolman model. Rich, all right, attention up here. Toolman model. What would be any of those things for number 3?
The claim is the point of the
Okay, so this is going to be your overall argument.
Smart guy. The glasses. Yeah, maybe smart. Yeah, studio.
Luke, what's our data grounds?
Refers to the proof or evidence.
Okay, so this is going to be proof or evidence. So you have your overall argument, you have data and grounds that support it, and then the warrant ends up providing what for these two things? It, Mike? What was the first part of the, was it just contents or did you have something else? A little bit more. Because the warrant ends up linking the data to the claim. So the word that we would use in its place would be what Jeremy just mentioned with the reasoning. The important thing to keep in mind is more often than not, in most everyday arguments, do you state the warrant? Is it implicit or is it explicit? It is inferred, it is implicit. Why weren't you here yesterday? I had a fever. Well, what does that mean?
Warrant, you don't consider when you're sick.
If I had a fever, I was ill. If I'm ill, most likely contagious. At that point, I could get other people sick. It was in the best interest for me and all of you that I stay home. That would be the reason. That would be the warrant. It's implied. It's not something that generally would get stated. Although when we do our arguments, certainly we try to state them a little bit more clearly so that people understand what that overall link is going to be between the two. So we have some different types of claims. We'll wait for this to come back. 3 different types. Jeremy, one of them is,
fact.
okay, we got a fact-based claim. We got a judgment or value, so they're going to be a little bit more of an opinionated one. So before you flip me, if it is fact-based, as opposed to it being judgmental, if it is fact-based, this can be proven or verified. So you have evidence that would prove that this is the case. So it is definitely provable. If it is a judgment, what's the key word that this type of claim is going to be? It can't be proven, but it's an opinion. If you're doing policy, which is what you're going to be doing starting next week when we do Student Congress, this is one where you have legislation taking place. You are looking for something to be enacted. So if it's fact, it's provable, it can be verified. If it's judgment, it's an opinion. Judgment value claims generally have the word should would be in them. If something is policy, you are looking to enact a law, change something, create some kind of policy that will be followed by people. You are like 12 steps ahead.
Yeah, it's neat.
We will, but let's not worry about it yet. All right, grounds. So we're taking a look at the data. We're taking a look at the evidence. We also have 3 types of grounds that we can have. Tyler, Steiger, which one do we have? Source credibility. Mike, what do we have for another one?
Analysis and reason.
All right. Nina, what do you got for? Okay, so you can have like something that can be like physical evidence, something that can be verified. Modality. Addie, what do you have? So, examples of modality. Possibly. Probably. You would not want to use always, never, because at that point you're going with absolutes where you're looking at 100% or 0%. I said that ethos is a term that sometimes could get confused. I could see this one being confused because we just did rebuttals in a debate, but that would be a different type of rebuttal as to what we're looking at for the Toulmin model. So when it comes to the contents of the Toulmin model, what do we mean by a rebuttal? Because it's not a counter-argument. It's an exception to the claim. So if I have a question on there tomorrow, and it goes define rebuttal, and Mike writes down counter-argument, I have to accept that because a rebuttal is a counter-argument. He just did one yesterday. If I write down question define rebuttal within the context of the Toulmin model, and he puts down counter-argument, at that point you are wrong. Because within the Toulmin model, it would be an exception to the claim. It's something that you are recognizing as could be a reason why this would not be the case. You will have your midterm starting tomorrow, unless there's a freak snowstorm and we don't have school. That would be a rebuttal within the Toulmin model. Now I could include the modality. You are most likely going to have your midterm tomorrow, unless there is some weird, force of nature that would keep school from happening. Most likely now is my modality, but I have highlighted what my rebuttal would All right, 4 core concepts, winning a debate. These could get written in any order, so it's not that you have to memorize this as being like number 1, number 2, or anything like that. Jeremy, give me 1.
Convince the judges.
All right, convince the judges. Luke, what's another one?
Know your argument.
That helps.
Know your limitations. Be aware of your
Kobe, a third one?
Know your limitations.
overcome.
And or self.
You could go with
Quit stealing my thunder.
you could go with know yourself, and that would include like strengths, limitations, and whatnot. So that'd be okay. Be aware of opponent. Some would, what if I write convince the judges, know your argument, know yourself, know your opponent, instead of be aware of opponent? That's right. Just because I know who you are doesn't mean I'm aware of you.
Well, it depends how you look at the word
I'm aware that you're
If you wrote know your opponent, I'd be okay with that. Know the judge, you got to be able to convince them. I'd say that's a little bit more important than simply just knowing who your judge would be. All right, 9 through 13. Any one of them. Josh, how about? So we're going slippery slope to circular reasoning.
I'll just use slippery slope.
Okay.
Assuming that one action will cause a series of undesirable and unavoidable consequences.
So essentially, it's going to be the domino effect, where one thing's going to lead to another. Keep in mind, for it to be slippery slope, you're taking a look at negative consequences. So it's not going to count as a slippery slope if you go, if you pass this test, then you'll graduate with honors, then you'll get into Harvard, and you'll have any job that you want. That's not going to be a slippery slope, because if it's a slope, it's moving downward, where things are kind of spiraling out of control. Most of you, for your examples, were putting like the DirecTV commercials, that were so popular a couple of years ago. That'd be perfectly fine. Medina, how about one of the others, 10 to 13? All right. And yeah, with the idea is that it's going to make it easier to attack. So you misrepresent what someone else is saying. Basically, you're twisting their words. Watch any kind of political campaign ad, you're going to see a straw man happening at just about any time. May, how about a false analogy? Oh, no.
I did everything in this. But, let me see here. Claiming that because two situations share similar characteristics, because this is this, that is also this.
So what it means is one similarity does not mean that all characteristics or traits are the same. Easiest example would be, mention those of you who have siblings, microphone away please. If you have the same, last name, that doesn't mean that all your similarities are going to be exactly, but all your traits are going to be exactly the same. If you had a interaction with a Republican that was positive, that doesn't mean every time you meet a Republican it's going to be a positive reaction, or that every time you meet someone it's going to be a bad reaction just because they share one similar trait. So one trait doesn't mean that all things are going to be exactly the same. What's another name for black and white reasoning?
Yes.
Not yes or no.
False dichotomy.
That's true.
Got him.
I was going either or, but false dichotomy works.
Either one.
Salt and pepper.
That's a good rapper.
Yes.
Luke, that was two.
What?
2 rappers, not 1.
Okay, technically 3 because
Good point.
the DJ.
All right, so black and white reasoning, you're generally going to have the example either or. So if I'm giving you logical fallacies and you have to identify them and you see the words either or both showing up, chances are you're probably looking at black and white reasoning. If Luke writes down false dichotomy, I would give him credit for that one because I can tell he still knows what's going on. The problem is not that you're just using the word either or, but if you say either or, that means how many outcomes are you potentially looking at? You're only looking at 2 of them. Most situations are more complex than that. Now again, you could have some where there are only 2, but the problem with black and white reasoning is that you are limiting yourself to only having 2. If, for circular reasoning, I ask for a definition and someone puts, well, that's the same thing as having a circular argument, no credit for that one. You gave another name, but need to know. So what is circular reasoning, or begging the question? What do we have? The conclusion is the evidence? Conclusion is the evidence. Don't be anything different with it? Same thing. So one thing that I would put in addition to that, the conclusion is restated to be accepted, and I would put accepted in quotation marks, as evidence. So you're not going to go, today is Wednesday because today is Wednesday, but you could do something along the lines of, I think we did Santa Claus as an example. Everyone believes in Santa Claus because the belief in Santa Claus is universal. We basically said the same thing, you restated it, you're trying to use that as evidence. Non sequitur, if you translate it, it means
It does not follow.
it does not follow.
I'm gonna start raising my hand. Just keep shouting.
Luke, what do we mean though by that, saying it does not follow?
An argument in which the conclusion does not follow the premise.
I would basically go like the conclusion is not truly related to the premise. I mean, and you're right with the definition that you use. So I think we were mentioning you ask your boss for a raise because you need more money for, Christmas, birthday gifts, whatever the case may be. Your boss is the one who, yes, could give you more money, but just because I need to get someone a birthday present isn't a valid excuse for why you would need a raise. You'd have to demonstrate that you deserve it when it comes to work and showing up on time and all those things. Red herring is meant to distract. So evidence used to distract.
Physically harm your opponent.
So essentially, this would be evidence that is like unrelated or random.
Distracted.
You have a midterm exam tomorrow. You need to study. Make sure you're ready for it so your grade goes well. Mr. Payne, I got a new puppy. See, like puppies. That would be a red herring. You're distracting attention away from what's going on. Can I stay up past curfew? Mom, I love you. Would be a red herring. Now, when Luke gets denied, no, you cannot stay out late, what is his next question going to be?
Don't you love me? Yeah.
Or don't you trust me?
Yeah.
It's a self-incriminating question.
John has a kid.
So, no matter how you answer the question, it is going to self-incriminate you in some way. Don't you love me? Yes, I love you. Well, then why aren't you? Why are you letting me stay out? Don't you think I'm a good student?
English teacher could just say that.
If Michael, if I pass back an assignment to you, that let's say you get 64% or something, well, why do you think, why are you trying to make it out that I'm such a horrible person or a horrible student? That's where you have a straw man and you're misrepresenting it. So, straw man's still going to be like a statement, but if you were going like, well, why do you think I'm such a bad person or a bad student, then you'd be going complex question. Well, I don't think you're a bad student. Well, why did I get an E? Well, I do think you're a bad student, at which point then you're going to get upset. So no matter how you would, if it's the question form, it's self-incriminating no matter how you go about it.
You just hit him with the truth.
The equivocation, we are shifting.
Key terms and arguments.
Usually an extended argument.
Could be done intentionally. This might be something that is done accidentally when you're looking at a definition of a term. But it's generally going to be in a more extended argument because you're going to keep going back to that term over and over and over again. Bandwagon, we know bandwagon, you're doing what is popular, or you're, at the very least, you're doing it because someone else has, so you're kind of jumping on that bandwagon. Ad hominem, this is the one where we have ad hominem, where you are going to attack the character of the opponent, assuming it is completely unrelated to the argument that's been going at hand. Emotional appeal, again, you're focusing on the emotions, and you're not looking at the logic, the reasoning that would be taking place. How about Texas sharpshooter?
You have to create with your conclusion and then prove it.
Texas sharpshooter. So Texas sharpshooter, you're going to find evidence that's going to fit that predetermined conclusion. Okay? Reductio ad absurdum, you reduce the argument to something that is completely absurd. Because it's a visual one, you're not going to have to worry about it. No. Now, keep in mind, scheme for number 24, and when you get down to trope with number 34, these aren't specific types of eloquence, but these would be categories that they would be fitting into. So if you have 25 going through 33, those are going to be types of schemes. If you have 35 on down to the rest, those are going to be tropes. If you have, you're given an example, and it ends up being parallelism, parallel structure, you're not going to put down scheme as the term of eloquence because that's just giving you what the type is. So the trope, you're taking a look at, you're changing the meaning of the words. This is going to be more figurative language. If you are looking at a scheme, at this point you are looking at the order or the arrangement of words.
I don't know what's happening.
If anything for your eloquence, folks, listen up. If anything for your eloquence, make sure you look over your A terms. Because you have anaphora, you have anadiplosis, you have antimetaboly, you have alliteration, you have assonance, you have allusion that's going to be taking place. You have quite a few of those A ones where you want to make sure you're able to kind of keep them straight. Based on the definitions that you have, for like 25 through 30, so going alliteration to antithesis, are there any of those that, looking at a definition, you can't distinguish what makes it different from something else?
Anti-metabolism.
Well, what's one that you know? So with Martin Luther King, I Have a Dream, when did we have anaphora? Or anaphora, is either pronunciation of the word. End of the speech, he has let freedom ring, let freedom ring, let freedom ring. He certainly has even him saying, I have a dream, I have a dream. If you were taking a look at antimetaboly, best example of antimetaboly probably was the JFK speech that we looked at. Remember, opening statement of JFK speech is going to be, so for antimetaboly, you're taking the same sentence and you're flipping it. So the main difference, I would say with antimetaboly, probably 28 and 30 are the ones that kind of get confused with it. Antimetaboly, you have the same word, it's just going to be reversed, or the same sentence, but it's going to be reversed. Antithesis is when you still have parallel form, but you have contrasting ideas. So the opening lines at Tale of Two Cities, if you had to read that one in 10th grade, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. You have contrasting statements, but they're written in parallel form. I think we used Neil Armstrong landing on the moon as an example. Josh, you want to just turn the light? That's the one. I just turned both off. So when he did the one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind, we'd say that one would be antithesis. His inauguration, I think it was 61. Yeah, January 61. Anaphora, as we said, that's the repetition that Mike was talking about at the beginning. Remember, epistrophe is going to be much like anaphora, but you're going to have repetition that is taking place at the very end of it. Anadiplosis, Okay, so you end with a word, you begin with that next word. Tomorrow you have your midterm. Your midterm will go a long way towards determining your success in life. Probably an example. Ended with your midterm, started the next sentence with your midterm. Now understand that anaphora, epistrophe, even antithesis, you could argue all of those things fall into the parallelism idea that you're repeating that same kind of sentence structure over and over and over again. I think metaphor, simile, and all those things would be pretty good. Is oxymoron one of yours? Good, because I meant to take it off. So, you can track words.
I am, dude.
So, like,
Like a giant.
gifted student.
Stop shaming me. Stop sweat shaming me. My diabetes. My IBS makes me sweat.
Mr. King, you're able to read this stuff, right?
What do you mean?
You're able to